You wake up with a quiet promise in your mind. Today will be different, but by the end of the day, nothing has changed. And somewhere deep inside, you already know why you procrastinate and how to rewire your brain. It doesn't begin with laziness. It never does. It begins in small, invisible moments that feel harmless at first. The alarm rings, and your mind whispers, just 5 more minutes. You open your phone, not because you want to waste time, but because something inside you resists the weight of beginning. And before you even realize it, the day has slipped into the same familiar pattern. Delay, avoidance, guilt, repeat. You don't notice it as a failure in the moment. It feels like comfort, like safety. But beneath that comfort, something deeper is happening. Something your brain has been quietly training itself to do. Because procrastination is not a time problem. It is an emotional regulation problem disguised as a habit. Your brain is not avoiding work. It is avoiding discomfort. And once you understand that, everything starts to shift. Think about the last task you delayed. It wasn't just a task, was it? Carried a weight. Maybe it felt overwhelming. Maybe it triggered self-doubt. Maybe it reminded you of expectations you weren't sure you could meet. So your brain did what it is designed to do. Protected you. It guided you away from that discomfort and toward something easier. Something predictable. Something that gave you immediate relief. And in that moment, scrolling your phone, watching videos, or doing something trivial didn't feel like failure. Felt like escape. And here is the quiet truth most people never realize. Every time you choose that escape, your brain learns. Creates a loop. Cue, discomfort. Response, avoidance. Reward, relief. And the more you repeat this loop, the stronger it becomes. Not because you lack discipline, but because your brain is becoming efficient at protecting you from emotional friction. But what if the real problem isn't that you're weak, but that your brain is simply following a pattern it has learned too well? Imagine a man sitting at his desk late at night. The room is quiet. The work in front of him is important, maybe even life-changing. But he doesn't start. Instead, he adjusts his chair, checks his phone, stares at the screen. Minutes pass, then hours. He tells himself he'll start soon. But he never does. Not because he doesn't care, but because starting feels heavier than delaying. And that weight is everything. Because starting a task is not just physical. It is psychological. It is the moment your brain anticipates effort, uncertainty, and potential failure. And when the brain detects those signals, it activates resistance. Not loudly, not dramatically, but subtly. Quiet hesitation. A sudden urge to do something else. A thought that says, I'll do it later. This is what psychologists call friction. Invisible resistance between intention and action. And the higher the friction, the more likely you are to delay. Now here's where it gets interesting. Most people try to fight procrastination with motivation. They wait to feel ready. They wait to feel inspired. But motivation is unreliable. It rises and falls like a wave. And if your system depends on something unstable, your actions will always be inconsistent. So the real shift doesn't come from forcing yourself harder. It comes from lowering the friction so much that starting feels almost effortless. Picture this. Instead of telling yourself to work for 2 hours, you tell yourself to open the document. Just open it. Nothing more. It sounds insignificant, almost pointless. But something changes. The resistance weakens. The brain no longer sees the task as overwhelming. It becomes manageable. And once you start, even a little, the hardest part is already behind you. Because the brain doesn't resist effort as much as it resists initiation. This is where micro-actions become powerful. Not because they are small, but because they bypass the emotional barrier. That stops you from beginning. And once you begin, momentum takes over. A single step becomes 2, then 3. And before you realize it, you are no longer stuck. But there's another layer most people miss. Procrastination is also driven by something called open loops. Every unfinished task creates a mental loop in your brain. A sense of incompleteness. And when too many of these loops exist at once, your brain becomes overwhelmed. Not by effort, but by clutter. So instead of starting, it freezes. It chooses avoidance as a way to escape the pressure of too many unfinished thoughts. This is why you sometimes feel mentally exhausted even when you haven't done much. It's not the work itself. It's the weight of everything you haven't started. Now imagine closing just one loop. Not all of them, just one. Something small, something simple. The moment you complete it, your brain registers closure, a sense of progress. And that feeling is addictive in the best way, because progress creates clarity, and clarity reduces overwhelm. But here's the deeper truth. Procrastination is not just about tasks. It's about identity. If you see yourself as someone who struggles with consistency, your actions will quietly align with that belief. Not consciously, but subconsciously. Every delay reinforces the identity. Every avoidance becomes evidence. And over time, you stop seeing procrastination as something you do, and start seeing it as who you are. And that is where real change becomes difficult, because you're no longer fighting a habit. You're protecting an identity. So the shift begins differently, not with effort, not with pressure, but with a subtle redefinition. Instead of saying, I need to stop procrastinating, you begin to see yourself as someone who starts, someone who shows up, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's small. And at first, it feels unnatural, because it contradicts your past behavior. But with each small action, the identity begins to reshape. Because identity is not built through intention. It is built through evidence. And every time you take action, no matter how small, you are casting a vote for the person you are becoming. Now consider your environment. Look around you. Your surroundings are constantly influencing your behavior, often without you realizing it. A cluttered space creates mental noise. Easy access to distractions increases temptation. And every time you rely on willpower to resist those distractions, you drain your mental energy. This is called decision fatigue. The more decisions you make throughout the day, the weaker your ability to choose discipline becomes. And by the time you finally sit down to do something important, your brain is already tired. So instead of relying on willpower, you change the environment. You remove distractions before they become a problem. You make the desired action easier than the alternative. And suddenly, discipline doesn't feel like a battle. It feels like a default. Because the strongest habits are not built on effort. They are built on design. Now imagine this shift happening slowly, quietly. You begin to notice something different. You no longer wait for the perfect moment. You start before you feel ready. You take smaller steps, but you take them consistently. And over time, those steps compound. Days turn into weeks, weeks into months. And the person who once struggled to begin is now someone who moves forward without hesitation. Not because they are more motivated, but because they have rewired the system. But there will still be days when resistance returns. Days when the old patterns try to pull you back. And in those moments, the goal is not perfection. It is awareness. You notice the hesitation. You recognize the urge to delay. And instead of fighting it, you understand it. You see it for what it is, a learned response, not a fixed truth. And then you take one small step anyway. Because the power is not in never procrastinating again. The power is in breaking the cycle when it begins. So the next time you find yourself delaying, pause for a moment. Not to judge yourself, but to observe. What are you really avoiding? Is it the task, or the feeling attached to it? And what is the smallest possible action you can take right now? Not tomorrow, not later, right now. Because change does not come from grand decisions. It comes from small, repeated actions that slowly reshape the way your brain responds to discomfort. And one day, without realizing it, you will notice something different. You will start tasks without overthinking. You will move forward without that familiar resistance. And the identity you once struggled with will no longer feel true. Not because you forced yourself to change, but because you became someone who no longer needs to. So today, don't try to fix everything. Don't chase perfection. Just take one small action, something almost too easy to fail, and let that be enough. Because the moment you start, even in the smallest way, you are no longer the person who procrastinates. You are the person who begins.